Hello, Wisdom Seekers, and welcome to Wisdom Seeker Live. I apologize for the brief delay, little challenge with some technology, and I'll share a little more about that, what that's going to look like, or what happened there. So be patient, and appreciate everyone being here, and I hope that you will tell me and us where you are joining from. And as always, I like to do a little bit of housekeeping leading up to the beginning of the show. One thing is that I ask you, as you join, please tell us where you're joining from. Just type it in the comments and share it. We always like to see where people are joining from. And second thing is that I like to do a little disclaimer when in doing live streaming. I have three different screens going on, and so to monitor and best be able to operate and have the show, it looks like I am distracted. I promise I'm not. I am just doing what is necessary for us to be able to be live and functioning. Welcome, Rosemary and Daniel and Sharon. Glad to have all of you. Rosemary's from Sydney, Australia, and Daniel from Nairobi, Kenya, and Sharon from here in the U.S. in New Jersey. So welcome aboard. Glad to have you here. And then the other thing I always like to do is just lay the groundwork for how we see wisdom as part of the podcast. And wisdom is a process. It's a three-step process, and it involves gaining knowledge, and something that we do hopefully on a daily basis, even moment by moment basis. And so we gain knowledge, and if we stop there, we are missing an awful lot, because we lack what we need to really use that. Welcome, Rosie from the Philippines. And so the second step in the process is called understanding, which is basically involves our experiences as we begin to take the knowledge that we have gained and do something with it. You know, knowledge is okay, but if all you've got is knowledge and you do nothing with it, then you have limited its value and its power. So the next step is to take that knowledge and apply it and use it. But and a lot of people will even stop there, unfortunately. And there's the third step in this process, and it's where we actually gain wisdom. And what the difference between experience and wisdom is when we begin to take our knowledge and understanding and we begin to see it and apply it from a much bigger perspective, a more outside of ourselves, and not just focused on how it affects us but others. Welcome, Matt Crump. Matt's from here in the U.S. In North Carolina. Welcome aboard. Good to have you. And so what we do is begin to get that bigger perspective. And the bigger perspective for those of us that are of a spiritual type is ideally to be able to begin to see our life and our situation through God's eyes, and begin to have that much bigger perspective, and include in that the understanding of other principles and so on. So that's the wisdom journey as we think of it here on the Wisdom Seeker Live. And it's not a once and done process. It's an ongoing process, because as we gain wisdom and more knowledge, and we begin to start the cycle over again. As we gain more knowledge and understanding, then our wisdom grows with it. And that's the beauty of wisdom, is it's a lifelong growth. So that's where we come from on the podcast. And this week's topic is about communication. A little background on how I got here for this. Just so you'll know, I don't just randomly pick out topics for our podcast. This was based on a question that came to my mind about two terms that we use a great deal, and they are attitude and mindset. And I began to observe over time that what is attitude and what's mindset, it may not be the same to everybody. And it got me to thinking. And by the way, the poll that I've got going right now out there indicates that I'm not alone in question in regards to understanding of these two terms, because it's equally, not quite equally split, but 60-40 split of people that say those two terms are the same versus those that say it's different. And I began to realize that we don't have clear communication, partly because we don't have a clear understanding or a common understanding of the words we use. The other part, and that goes to how well we communicate, but then I realized that how well we communicate doesn't necessarily mean we're communicating wisely. And so that's kind of the background to it. And then a little story about the delay this morning. It goes to, in some senses, the concept of communication and the challenges. Is when I scheduled with the streaming service for the podcast today, I went through the usual process of setting things up, and I have to give the time that it's going to be live. And so I was clicking through, and in this particular case, I have to tell it AM or PM. And normally I go through and everything's fine. Well, apparently I did not click correctly. I clicked PM instead of AM, and which meant that when I went to go live this morning, it said that I could go live on 2 of the 3 platforms, but not LinkedIn. And I thought that would not be good. So I had to scramble and adjust and reboot. The point is, small pieces of information either left out or done incorrectly lead to miscommunication and confusion. So as I like to do when we take on a new topic, I like to look at the, find some common ground so that we can communicate effectively. And I like to just look at definitions of words. And in this case, definition of communication: the imparting or exchanging of information or news, means of sending or receiving information, such as phone lines or computers. So communication is exchange, or it says imparting or exchange. I don't think we have effectively communicated until we have exchange. We'll get into that a little bit, but I think it's interesting that it involves information, which we want to share. And I think part of it, as we begin to discuss this, we're also going to have to, if we're going to be wise in it, we're going to have to consider motivation as well. And being a trainer and teacher, I know that having multiple senses involved in understanding is valuable. So I like to look up when we're doing a new topic. I like to look up visuals on it, images, and it's pretty interesting as you do this. And I'm not doing anything elaborate here, but I'm just searching the word communication and going to images. And when you start looking at how we as a society look at communication visually, it's pretty fascinating. You see here exchanging information from brain to brain, and in other times it's defined in what those things are. So it's pretty interesting how we look at communication, and even all of the elements of communication involved. This is pretty insightful. You see about talking about being effective. You see it talking about information, language, processing, barriers, written. So it's pretty insightful to begin to look at it in that fashion. And like to share that. So let's put that back aside for the moment and move forward. Welcome. Let's see here. Got some additional folks that have joined us. Panda Sarika from India, welcome. And Prasenjit, if I apologize if I mispronounce a name, I do my best. If I mispronounce, please correct me. I'd like to show great respect for people's names. And we also have Bernhard, welcome. And let's see, I believe that's it. So let's dive in a bit. I see that we've already got some great comments going. So, and I like to hear the comments of those of you that are on with us. Rosemary's comment, first seek to understand, then to be understood. And Rosemary, a lot of wisdom in that brief statement. And indeed, that is important because quite often when we think we're communicating, we're not, because we don't approach it correctly. And let's see, Bernhard offers a comment also. Thank you for getting deeper into the art and science of communication. You're welcome, Bernhard. I hope always, as we have the wisdom seeker, that we deal with things that are going to be valuable, not just fill space. And Panda offers communication facilitates better exchange of ideas. Welcome, Ina from Georgia. I assume that's Georgia where I live. If so, welcome, neighbor. And another comment, welcome, Zaid. Glad to have you here. Zaid's one of our regulars. Without communication, verbal and nonverbal, nothing happens. So yeah, communication is so key. And so there's two parts to it, and that is communicating well and then using communication wisely. And by the way, I am going to do this in a 3-part series because I think that there's a lot to it. And at least in one of them, I'm going to have a special guest that is someone that is especially focused and keen on communication. And I'll reveal that later. But another thing that I wanted to share is about communication. Communication is not dissimilar to learning. Okay, and when I teach trainers and I teach leaders, I teach them about learning concepts. And these learning concepts tie into this. And I wanted to show you one of the graphics from the PowerPoint that I use when I'm teaching trainers and leaders. And I think it helps us begin to understand the process. Welcome, Anwar. Glad to have you here. Anwar's been with us before. So I hope everyone can see this slide. And this is a capsulization of how learning occurs, the process. And so what happens is that there's information that we have, and then we offer it up. And then at that point, I mean, if we're into talking to ourselves, we can not communicate but have information. But what we need to do is share information with other people. And when we do, it needs to be received. And that's part of where our breakdown becomes, is in receiving. And there are barriers and obstacles that cause us to have trouble between giving information and it being received. And then in this total process, though, even once information is received, it has to be processed. And because for us to be effective in communication, we want people to process what we say and begin to make sense of it, if you will. And then in the learning style concepts and learning process concepts, we do some comparison, similarities, and differences. And then we also sometimes have to break down the information into smaller, manageable parts. And then the last part of the learning process, and is also akin to good communication, is if we give information, especially if we're looking for a response, then that information, that once it's been processed, is then applied. Something is happening from it. And so very similar between learning and communication. And so I thought that might be helpful to see this graphic to give it some context. So let's take that back down. Seeing some great comments. And yes, Anwar is communication is verbal and nonverbal both. That's right. We have to keep that in mind if we're going to be effective in communication. And then let's see, Matt, being quick to listen and slow to speak is a powerful way to, number one, allow the other person to feel and be heard. And number two, doesn't have to make you the author of the next chapter in the book hung by the Yeah, I get that. Sometimes our motivation causes us to do things when communicating that leaves something to be desired. I appreciate that Matt brings into it the not just the exchange of information, but the exchange of, shall we say, heart, or I guess comes under emotional intelligence. And so yes, and Anwar makes another great observation. We communicate without even uttering a single word. Yes, so true. So anyway, we talk about effective communication and communicating well versus wisdom in our use of communication. And so we will be talking about communicating well, but I want us to also talk about over the next 3 podcasts, how do we be wise in communicating, not just communicate effectively, because we can communicate effectively and do so unwise, and the outcome can be really a big problem. For example, we may say something that is true. We may communicate it very clearly using the right words, tones, verbal and nonverbal cues, and all of that. But if it's at the wrong time, or to the wrong person, or inappropriate setting, or whatever, then we may have communicated effectively, even well, but we have communicated unwisely. And one of the things that I think of very much about this is we have a big concept now that we like to talk about so much on LinkedIn and other social media, is about transparency. And one of the unwise concepts related to communication that I see among people, and even in my own experiences, is that transparency, which means being open and showing what we are about, who we are, and things. Transparency is not always about saying or communicating everything we think and know and understand and even have wisdom on. So we got to be careful that in the name of transparency that we are not being unwise in our communication, because one of the things that I've had to learn over the years, and this is tough because of who I am and my different gifting and talents, they tend to make me want to speak my mind and share what's going on and so on. But I have had to learn that the wisest approach to communication I have is to be quiet and to listen. And that's why one of the things that I do currently, and I suspect I'll be practicing for the rest of my life, is that I will have to learn when to talk and when not to talk. And I will tell you that we are generally better off erring on the side of being quiet than speaking up. One of my favorite sayings, I believe it's attributed to Abraham Lincoln, is it's better to be silent and thought a fool than to speak up and remove all doubt. And so one of the aspects of being wise in our communication is knowing when and what to communicate. So real key there. Welcome, Karen. Glad to have you. And Satish, glad to have you. And Sharon has a comment. Now, Sharon, I want to share your comment, but for some reason, sometimes StreamYard doesn't identify people's identity correctly, but this is Sharon. And her comment is, you also have to know your audience and who you'll be addressing. Certainly, Sharon, that is part of the wisdom involved in communication. One of the things that I've had to grow in and learn as I have gone from being a good Southern boy here in the U.S. to having audience and interaction and engagement with people from all over the world, is that I have to consider before I speak, hopefully, that different cultures, different languages can be a factor. And that's not just in language, not just in words of communication, but as we mentioned earlier, even the nonverbal cues. And being wise is to get that broader context and get that understanding. So, I want to make sure I welcomed Karen. Karen's one of our regulars. Karen, good to see you here. And let's see, Satish offers a comment. First, understand and then be understood are the words of Stephen Covey. Yeah, that was something I think Matt shared, but good to know that the source of that comment or that quote. And then let's see, Anwar offers communication will stay longer and considered effective if we keep listening and targeting audience interest as a top priority. Yeah, sometimes the mistake that we make and the unwise approach is we say what's on our mind, whether it matters or is appropriate to the audience or the people around us, no doubt. And let's see, from Rosemary here in Australia, the ventricular is interesting and challenging. I can use a slang word when greeting a friend, and it's known to be a welcome. I can say the exact same word when someone has annoyed me, and it demonstrates just how far from welcome that person is. Yeah, Rosemary, again, back to understanding our audience or looking at the languages, cultures, those are all factors. And if we're going to be not just effective, but wise in our communication, is something that we need to consider and really evaluate before we speak, which brings me to another concept that I would offer that is a part of being wise in communication, is a concept that is the way I've heard it termed and like is measured responses. Too often, our unwiseness comes through in our quickness to speak. And as we have kind of a slang saying around here, that too often we engage our mouth before we put our brain in gear. And the problem is we speak before we've considered. So good practice to be wise in communication is to take measured responses. Take a moment before we open our mouth. And it's hard at moments, in heat of the moment. Somebody has just offended us or hurt us or whatever, or we think that somebody's doing something we think is stupid or dangerous, and so we respond with communication that may or may not be the best communication, regardless of how effective. It may not be delivered in the appropriate timing or manner or so on. And so measured responses, if we have to count to 5, take 3 deep breaths, whatever works for us to really consider before we engage our mouth and start talking. I think there's an old saying that says once a word's been released, you can't take it back. And that is so true, especially in verbal communication. Once we've said it, boy, if we've been unwise in doing so, the damage is potentially done and sometimes very hard to undo or overcome, shall we say. What I have, and Rosemary says what she's found interesting is how Australian slang is accepted in all parts of the world, even if it's not understood. Indeed, I find it interesting that we use sayings and colloquialisms that we are common to us, and we understand the background to them or whatever, and when we use them, we think of it in one way. What we don't realize, because it sounds good or seems to fit the situation, but what we don't realize is what the real meaning of this thing is. And when we are not careful, we appear either insensitive, we appear ignorant, or any of a number of possibilities. I have to share, I'll tell on myself. There's a saying, and this is and I apologize, a little bit of a crass saying, but when I learned and grew up, it was just to talk about acting quickly and getting job done and moving on or whatever. But the saying is, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And once I finally understood what that meant and the context and everything, I went, oh my, because it in the context of its original meaning, it to me is inappropriate, crass, and I have virtually eliminated its use from my vocabulary because of once I understood it. And so just be careful, as Rosemary has indicated, that just because you like the sound of it or you think it's cute or whatever, it might not be wise to use it. So be sure you do a little research before you start using new words. Let's see, Zaid offers we can retract anything we communicate, then we have to clarify. And so, yeah, clarifying our comments become a challenge. If we've said something incorrectly, we have to then explain, apologize, and then the effectiveness of our communication has diminished. Because hopefully, if we are effective in communication, we get it, the information shared the first time with clear understanding, and it's received and then acted on in accordance. and responded to with clarity. Let's see here. Anwar suggests communication is a two-way game, even before a large audience. There are things which can definitely be learned, which master you the art of public speaking. Indeed, yes, it is two-way. And recently, I have been doing more speaking, and one of the things that I've had to begin to adjust to is because when I'm in front of groups, quite often I am training. And so how you communicate, the words you use, the delivery, and so on in a training setting is different than it is in a public speaking environment. And then one of the things I've been recently learning is that the difference between public speaking in a live environment versus a virtual environment, because as Anwar noted, you have to be able to communicate two ways, even in public speaking. And one of those key pieces is being able to observe nonverbal cues and responses. And it's a lot more difficult to do that in a virtual environment. And additionally, it is harder to engage in verbal communication or verbal dialogue with a virtual audience, because it's much more difficult to ask questions and get responses. So there's your setting and environment can be a factor. And Karen offers a comment, is I see more companies engaging diversity and inclusion. There are companies with thousands of employees in this country. And yes, part of being wise in our communication is understanding diversity around us. And one of the things, along with culture and ethnicity and demographic and things of that sort in regards to diversity, one of the challenges we're currently facing in the workforce is difference in generational diversity. And there was a time where generational diversity was not such a big factor for a number of reasons, but now that has changed remarkably, and especially in regards to technology. And what happens is we see, for example, someone of a younger generation talking about technology using terms such as apps and, oh my goodness, I'm going to probably butcher this, but using technology terms that someone from my generation could readily have no clue what they are communicating, not because they're not listening or trying, but because of the disparity in the generations. There is a difference in even an understanding of language, terminology, and that becomes a real challenge. That's why one of the things that I do to help bridge some of the generational gaps is I offer technology training for people of more of my generation or Generation X that aren't as technology savvy, and we don't speak the technology language. And one of the things that I do with that training is I put the technology understanding and communicate it without using technology jargon. And that helps some people grasp that, or I know this may not be politically correct. I train not using geek speak or technology speak or whatever. Welcome, Sam, from the U.S. Sam's my neighbor and friend, and he's actually been on the show, as is, by the way, Matt Crump. Appreciate both of you guys joining as a participant and sharing your thoughts. And then let's see, Rosemary's got a comment here. Find diversity an interesting concept. people have interesting frameworks around just what diversity is and what it definitely isn't. Yeah, that's a whole nother element. We're talking about communication. Everybody thinks that everybody else understands when they say diversity what they mean by it. And I don't think that's the case. I think that diversity is another concept, a term, a principle that is misunderstood. And as a result, it leads to miscommunication and even conflict because of that. And in fact, one of the challenges we face in not communicating well and not communicating wisely is the amount of conflict that we create with those that we need to be able to engage with and work with even. So learning to communicate effectively and wisely but has become more important now than ever before, rather than just saying, okay, I know how to use the words and I can pronounce them well and I can put them grammatically correct in a sentence and I can have all of the dictionary meanings in place, but without having the wisdom to know when and how to communicate, we create conflict. So it's just beyond the effective use of words. There's a lot more to communication. As I train leaders, one of the things that I have to help them begin to understand is wisdom in communication doesn't involve just delivery of words to someone. One of the things I see, I deal with a lot of frontline supervisors, managers, and one of the struggles they have is that they communicate a direction to someone on their team. And the assumption is, first of all, that the person has a clear understanding of the terminology being used, as well as an assumption that the context, they understand the context of the communication. And so they say, okay, go do X, whatever X is. And then when they come back around to see if X was done and done well, they get shocked because either X wasn't done or X was done incorrectly. And it comes down quite often to communication problems. So one of the tricks that I offer to leaders in communication, and if I would suggest to you that you try this, it's a concept we use in the military. It's called brief back, and it's under the idea that when we give direction to soldiers in the military, we brief them on what we need them to do. And what we do as a normal part of this is, after briefing a soldier on something, we tell them, okay, brief me back. And it's not real, it sounds kind of almost secret squirrel kind of thing, but it's not. It's simply, I just told you to do this. Now you tell me what you just told me. And just by that simple act, in terms of communication effectiveness, we learn very quickly that what we thought we were communicating was very different from what was received and understood on the other person's part. So again, effective communication can be helped by using some different tips and components. Let's see here. Anwar has a comment. He says, you have to be able to adapt new ideas, concepts, and technology continuously to fill generational gap from the next generation. Yep. One of the things, that folks of my age group have had a difficult time learning or accepting even is change, because or especially the earlier or older baby boomers change was there, but it was very slow and slight. And the change has always been around, but it has become so fast and so short-lived in terms of time of adjustment that we've got to learn to change. So one of the lessons that I've had to learn, and I've had to encourage my generation and others, is that we've got to accept change. And not only that, but we can no longer rest on having learned a concept and it not change or it last a lifetime. And so part of effective communication and being wise is always learning new ways, new terms, and so on. That's why I approach each day with the idea that I'm going to learn something new today, because even though I'm an old guy, at the end of the day, I have not learned everything, and especially given the amount of change that has gone on. So I've got to be effective in continuing to learn. Let's see, Sam makes a comment. Yeah, context can be subtle. Cultural awareness is important as part of that process. By all means, I know Sam has, like me, been a teacher and a professor. And one of the things that we learn quickly, especially in today's cultures, that our cultures are no longer homogenous. They are made up with quite a diverse group of people from a cultural standpoint. So learning the cultural awareness is so important. So communicating wisely versus communicating effectively. Communicating effectively is about learning how to use words correctly, how to build sentences correctly, and get better at even pronunciation. One of the challenges that I see and that I've experienced is even regional dialect and accents. I think back years ago, I was part of a youth choir, and we traveled once a year, different parts of the country, even internationally. In this particular case, we traveled from Georgia. And for those of you that are not familiar with our geography in the U.S., Georgia is in the southern part of the U.S. And then to the northeast, we have what we call New England, and that's where New York, most people are aware of New York. So we traveled from Georgia up to New York, and as to be expected, coming from Georgia, we were mostly all Georgia people, and we are known for our Southern accent, and sometimes we are known to speak slowly, and sometimes that can drive people crazy. Sometimes it makes it easier to understand. So this group, we went to New York, and we had one member of our choir, a young lady, that was especially blessed with a Southern accent. We call it a Southern drawl. And when you get to that situation, it's not uncommon that even single syllable words have multiple syllables used in Southern. So this young lady went up there or was part of the group. So she was speaking to some folks there in New York at a school we visited, and they found it truly entertaining to listen to her speak, to a point that some of them crowded around her and just asked her to talk, and then she would speak. They would laugh, and it was quite amusing. Fortunately, situation was not taken offensively or hurtful to her, but the idea is that as we communicate, that we consider our own manner of communication, our own dialects and terms that are regional as well as accents. I know that differing accents are more difficult for different people to understand depending on what's going on. And I know that there are certain accents that I struggle with understanding. And so, what I have had to learn to do, if I'm going to be wise in communication and not miscommunicate or even be offensive, is sometimes I have to ask for something to be repeated. And I try to do it respectfully and carefully. But at the end of the day, I guess I risk looking ignorant or whatever, but just simply asking, say that again, please. And there's nothing wrong with that. Better to do that than to misunderstand, miscommunicate, and have negative effects as a result. And one of the things that I do over the years as a teacher and trainer and speaker, I have worked very hard to be able to pronounce people's names, especially names that are that I'm not familiar with from other countries and so on. And I do my best, but I always say, if I mispronounce your name, please help me understand how to pronounce correctly. And then in the spirit of good communication, I then apply it, which is important. Rosemary observes that she enjoys Scottish or Irish accents. Yeah, I do too, Rosemary. But what's funny is that there are times in listening to Irish and Scottish speak that I enjoy the accent, but sometimes I'm going, now, what did they just say? And I think that certain irony is that we as Americans theoretically speak English. But I will tell you that if you were to, or I have even had situation being in the UK and native speaking folks that are speaking English probably better than I do, start a conversation and I hear it and I'm going, wow, I don't understand half of what they're saying. So what I have come to recognize and even share, that we as Americans, we really don't speak English, we speak American. And for those of you that are attuned to communication, know what I mean by that. And let's see. Anwar, learnings shouldn't be stopped at any level of age. This makes your audience interested when you communicate in their terms. And Anwar, I'm trying not to get off on a tangent here or get on my soapbox, but I agree with you completely that learning should not have a start and an end. But unfortunately, much of what we've done in and around education, and I know we've talked about education and you'll appreciate where I'm coming from, I hope, but part of what we've done in education is we have what I term, we have jailed learning. We have limited it to education environments, unfortunately. And so the idea of learning ongoing has been diminished as a result. So I agree with you completely. That's why, again, I seek every day to learn something new. It may be something small, it may be something big, but if I do that, it helps me keep relevant and be able to identify with and engage with people of a younger generation. One of the things that I bring to a table as a coach in working with organizations is my ability to bridge generations in the process, because part of what we've got right now are amazingly bad generational gaps for a number of reasons, and we aren't doing a lot about it, and it includes affecting communication, which causes conflict, misunderstanding, and even effectiveness in doing our job. And let's see, Sam shares a comment here. Cubans, Sam is of Cuban descent, so he can speak to this with authority, tend to use hand movements a lot when speaking. Typically, tone feels emotional, not known for quiet. Yes. And if you don't understand that about a particular culture, it is easy to get possibly offended, because if someone is very animated and use their hands a lot and are more loud, if you will, in their communication, some of us will think, well, why are they mad at me? What did I do wrong? When in the reality is they actually could be excited to know you and enjoy sharing, but it comes across in a different way. And so that's all part of being both effective and wise in our communication. Sharon shares a comment. Let's see. She agrees with Anwar that it doesn't matter how old you are, you should always want to learn and share with others. And thanks for a great comment. And I can especially understand that of Sharon, being Sharon is an educator. And so we as educators hopefully have a propensity to learning more and staying more attuned with that. And then let's see, Rosemary's comment. In England, they speak what is known as the Queen's English, yes. And when I was in the States speaking at a conference, I found the different American accents were difficult to understand. The regional accents were easy for me to pick up. Rosemary, I don't know where you were speaking, but if you encountered any of us Southerners, you probably especially picked up on that and may have even been somewhat entertained by it and amused, if not confused. And Rosemary also adds that Italians and Greeks also speak with a lot of hand movements. Yeah, that's a cultural element, and it's part of who we are and what we are. And Daniel asked a good question. Do we have a world national language? That is an outstanding question. What I would offer is that, and I'm going to be careful in approaching this, but English has become kind of a common language. And now, I know in saying that, and after what I just commented about English versus American, that could be at its own element. So English, in some form or another, has become somewhat of a universal language. I find that even in interactions with good friends in India and other parts of the world, that English is generally a base to work from. And in fact, with my new affiliation with International Internship University, the rollout of the first curriculums will all be in English, and came up for discussion about others. But I think it interesting that an organization that started and is based in India would use English as the basis for rolling it out. And I understand why, because that's, I think, the closest that we get to a world national language is English. But even English has its own challenges. And so Rosemary says she was in California. Yeah, California, you probably encountered quite a mixture of cultures and accents in that location. We could talk about that at length, but sometime maybe if you're back in the States, I'll have you to come to the southern part of the U.S. and get a different flavor of our country. But And let's see, Sam makes a comment, or I'm sorry, Daniel makes a comment that, oh, wait a minute, back up, give it context. He's responding to Sam's comment that hopefully we can make that be the language of love. Certainly needs to be at the heart of our motivation in communication, could go a long way. And Daniel says it's a nice comment, and in fact that love maybe become a subject to schools. Indeed, a lot to learn in that for anyone that is interested in learning about language and being effective and wise in communication. Learning the meanings of words, and for example, in English, for us, love can mean anything from a desire to have a piece of candy or something like that, all the way up to a willingness to lay down our life, and it's all used the same word. And so it becomes very confusing. I appreciate that in some of the other languages, such as Hebrew and maybe Aramaic, and some of the Middle Eastern languages, love, there isn't just one word for love. And I think that we would be wise to consider that. So comment from Zaid. People from south of Europe, Middle East, and North African countries tend to use high volume. And people might think a fight is going on. And Zaid, I have experienced that. And it has been really interesting being engaged with this international organization and to hear the different communication, including just that. One of the things that has that I've had to adjust to and understand is just that some cultures are very passionate, and therefore when they're speaking, their voice can be higher than what I would expect, because initially my reaction, if I were to not be wise in my approach, would be, well, why are these people yelling at me? And that's not a wise response, and it's not a true response. The other cultures, people are speaking the way they're accustomed to, and there is nothing more than just their view of effective communication. And very important that before we, like I said, engage our mouth, we need to get our brain going. And when we do that, we avoid being offensive, appearing ignorant, and unwise. So yeah, definitely. Zaid offers another comment, says Greek have 5 different words for love. Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with some of those. They're similar to some of the Hebrew and Aramaic words, agape and phileo, and so on. So yeah, it's one of the things to take away is that as we consider being wise and effective in communication, is to become a learner and stay a learner of language, of words, and what they mean and how they affect different cultures. And note from Daniel, he says, I've always wanted to learn French. Could you recommend a free site for this? Wow, Daniel, I have to think on it. The only thing that comes to my mind for learning any language, and it's not free, is or a group called Rosetta Stone, and they have developed quite a good system. I have to laugh at your bringing up French. For me, took 3 years of French in high school and theoretically learned it, but now the extent of my French capability is a few sentences, a few words, and I can count some in French. So apparently I did not learn it well, or I should be able to speak pretty well But that's just the way it is. And if I think of something, Daniel, from a standpoint of help learning the French language that might be a free resource, I'll pop it in the comments as it comes to me. And one last comment, Zaid, before we wrap up. Other people also need to understand that you, the receiver, don't know and should balance their customary way of communication with others, if not similar. Great closing point. As we talk about communication and consider it, if we're going to be wise, and this is something we talk about each week here, is that wisdom is looking at knowledge and understanding, and in this case, communicating, be outside of our own self, outside of our own self-interest. And that has a two-sided or two-edged sword, and that is we have to consider how we deliver, but also be considerate of how others deliver to us, and not get offended because we automatically think, in the case of cultures that speak very loudly when they speak, that they're yelling at me. So great way to wrap up this session is learning to begin to be wise in our communication. Don't look at it just from our own self-interest. Look at it outside of ourselves and consider the much bigger picture involved. So we're up against time. I think we could go on for a long time, but good news is we will continue this topic next Monday, and I hope that you will invite others to join us, so that part of my hope and desire is in gaining wisdom that we can also do a better job of being able to engage with each other well without creating animosity, frustrations, and so that we can begin to truly operate in the concept of love. So thanks, everyone. Great comments. I really appreciate your engagement, your comments. They add so much to it, and look forward to having everyone back next week. Watch for the announcement on LinkedIn. And yeah, Rosemary, I appreciate you hanging in there. I know it's a late night there in Australia. And so I hope that you will all be blessed this week, and that you will continue to move forward in seeking and gaining wisdom in all areas of life, and especially as we talk about communication. So thanks, everyone. God bless. Have an amazing day, an amazing week. And we'll see you guys next Monday, 8 o'clock on LinkedIn, YouTube, or through Facebook. So goodbye and God bless.